The first age that I was introduced to drugs and alcohol was 9 years old. That went on for about 3 years.
Drugs, guns, excuse my French and using these terrible words.
A lot of kids are dying from knife crime. A lot more than what people realise.
I'm not going in prison anymore. I'm not going to take drugs anymore. What happened in your life that made you want to stop? What was the catalyst for that?
When it comes to knife crime, is we're all battling to try and get bleed control kits put up in areas.
Not only are you out of the gangs, away from selling drugs, away from taking drugs, you are now doing really positive things with Carla for other people.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Emily Abraham Presents the Love Luxury podcast. And today I have with me Carl Scott, who is an ex-gang member but is now a mentor. So we're going to be discussing that amazing transition that you've made over the years. Let's get to it. Hi, Carl.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me on.
And we've got your lovely partner in the background watching as well, Carla. She's over there. I know that you come as a duo, but because of the setup, we couldn't do that today. But we just got you on, and then when we're set up a bit better, we'll get her on another day as well.
Perfect.
Let's talk about the early part of your life, because you've got a lot of layers to you and a lot of things that you're doing currently. But before that, you had a previous life that led you to where you are now.
Yeah.
So let's touch on where you grew up. Where are you from?
So I was brought up in Nottingham.
Yep.
Yeah, it was quite, how can I put it? My childhood was based around dragged up instead of brought up.
Yeah.
In a way. It was, most of my life, family-wise, it was quite strict. To a certain extent, it's quite strict. And it was always like from pillar to post all the time. So we'd move house pretty regular. My dad was, from an early age, my dad left from around, I'd say about 2 years old. But that, the beginning part of that, up to them years of being about 2 years old, there was just a lot of domestic incidents that was happening in my house with my mum, and he was in and out of prison and stuff, and he was, I don't know, my mum fell pregnant quite early with me, so she was just turned 16, and it was the first time that she'd ever done the deed, really. And obviously my dad was a little bit older, so she was a young mum, and so found out that she was pregnant. But yeah, and that was quite difficult for her. And the relationship that she had with my grandparents, there was a conversation that went on from an early age for me to be adopted. But the thing is, the adoption would have come from, it wouldn't have been someone from outside of the family. It would have been my Uncle John and my Auntie Fran, which we always do look back at that and think, well, would things have been a bit different if they would have adopted me, because they was good people. And they loads of nice family holidays, brought up well, because he was quite strict, my Uncle John. But my granddad, he stopped that from happening, and he supported my mum.
So what was the reason he stopped your uncle from adopting you? What was the reason for that?
Because he felt that my mum should take on the responsibility of being a mum. She's fell pregnant with me. You're going to have the baby, be the mum.
It was made your bed, lie in it kind
exactly,
of attitude. Yeah.
But she had a lot of support with that.
Okay.
So there was quite a lot of family support for me as a child. So, there was my aunties, and there was certain uncles, that had helped with that. And obviously my grandparents, I'd be there quite regular. So, yeah, I was quite looked after. But obviously, because of the stuff that was going on between my mum and my dad, there's a lot of manipulation can happen within relationships, and if something's bad that goes on between a male or a female, they seem to keep going back to that. And people are questioning, why would you go back to something like that? But obviously love works in strange ways, and that's used to be what happened. So the final kind of part from that, for my mum, for her to leave, was there was a major incident at home, and there was big arguments and stuff, and he tried to kill me as a baby. I don't know if it was so much as tried to kill me. I don't know if he was trying to scare my mum. So he hung me out.
He was using you as a tool.
Yeah. He's just trying to keep it a manipulation. And he hung me out some windows. But I was crying and stuff, obviously, because there was a lot of shouting going on. He's obviously pulled me back in, and he was running around the house with a Stanley knife and stuff, and he was just kicking off in the house. But I think that was one of the final moments, really, for at that age, really, that my mum kind of decided that was it. But luckily for her, he got a 5-year sentence in prison for an arson. There was a next door neighbour of our block of flats that had been accused of an offence to do with minors. So
Okay.
him and my uncle decided that they was going to set fire to his house, basically.
Took law into their own hands.
Yeah, exactly that, yeah. It turned out he wasn't in the house. Whether it was true, I don't know that story from back then, you know,
Of
but
course,
this is what I
yeah.
know. But, you know, luckily for him, if he was innocent, he wasn't in the house. So, and he got sent down, and that was my mum's way of getting away from it.
So you mentioned that your mum was in quite a turbulent relationship with your dad. Was he a drug user?
No, alcohol.
He had an addiction to alcohol.
Yeah, I could say that everybody that I know through my family are drinkers. They all love a drink. Like that's just what my family do. Like everything surrounds pubs with my family, and I spent most of my childhood years growing up in the pubs. So you know, my parents was like my mum met my stepfather. He was musical. He did a bit of singing. He played the bass and that, and they was in a bit of a band and stuff. So it kind of. We was always toing and froing backwards and forwards from babysitter to babysitter, and because it was always on the night scene and stuff, kids can't go in at that age.
Of course, yeah.
So yeah, it was alcohol's always been quite prominent in my life, really, for family. But yeah, he did like to drink and he liked to gamble.
Okay.
Yeah, he was always in the bookies, and he was actually a bingo caller in a bingo hall. Yeah, so yeah, he did love a drink. Yeah.
You had a really good relationship with your granddad, didn't you? Tell us a little bit about him.
So my granddad, he was, what you see is what you get with him. Well, what you did see is what you got. He was really, it's hard to explain. I used to love going to my granddad's because we used to have a program when I was a kid called Wurzel Gummidge.
I remember Wurzel
Loved
Gummidge.
it.
I loved it. Aunt Sally.
Yeah, and I loved that program. And like the best memories for me for that was, you know, if I'd go there on a Saturday night and, you know, I'd sit there with my granddad watching a bit of compo, which is Last of the Summer Wine, and I'd sit because he used to dress himself up with a woolly hat and he'd do this funny face and he'd look like compo.
Yeah.
And he'd always like pick me up and stuff, and he'd give me he had this wallet that he used to be able to like, it's ones that flap open and you tap it and the change comes down the bottom.
Oh, okay.
So he'd give me a couple of £1 out of that, and he had this chocolate, I can't remember what it was called, like Beauville or something. I had a picture of a ship on the front of it. That's the one, yeah.
Dark chocolate.
Yeah, so he loved it, and and obviously because I'm a kid, I'll love any chocolate.
Yeah.
So he used to give me some of that chocolate. We'd sit there and watch a bit of Last of the Summer Wine and that, and then like whilst I'm still sat there like nodding off, my gran's there over there, because she used to smoke like a chimney.
Okay.
So she'd be sat there knitting away, but she'd fall asleep with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth and that, and there'd be ash all over her. It's just hilarious when you look back at it now. But he'd go upstairs and he'd get the bed ready, and he'd always put, even if it was the summer and stuff, he'd put like a hot water bottle in the bottom of the bed. He'll pull the quilt covers back over, and it was nice and warm when you got in. So the bed would be ready and that, and then Sunday morning he'd wake me up with a nice bowl of porridge, and he'd sit me down in front of the TV with a nice tray and a bowl, and he'd have Wurzel Gummidge on the TV for me on a Sunday morning. So yeah, I had really good memories, and I used to. There was a certain milk that I used to like, which was like sterilised milk, and but it's really tasty, and I still like it to this day. So it's and he used to order that from the milkman, and like obviously these days you don't really have many milkmen now, and like he used to order me 7 bottles of sterilised milk, 1 for every day of the week, because my school was only like 5 minutes up the road. So at lunch I'd come to his for my bottle of milk. But the older I got, the more rebellious I started to be. So I'd be called, like they used to use the word like yobbo, he used to call me, oh, you yobbo, like, you know, because I was a little bit worse for wear as a teenager. But he, you know, all the way up until my granddad passed away, you know, like he always kept his dignity with everything, and he passed away of Alzheimer's. So he's all the way till the day he died, it was just dignity the whole time. So yeah, good man.
That's really sad that you lost him. It's a fact of life, unfortunately, isn't it? But I can see that you're touched talking about that. Bless you. Should we move on to where things kind of changed for you? Because I know that when you were sort of really young, you were introduced to drugs and alcohol. So
I had an uncle. So like I said previously before, with like my parents being out doing the music scene and that, so we'd get passed from pillar to post with babysitters. But if it wasn't, because obviously there was 3 of us then, so my brother and sister was here, and we all couldn't go to my grandparents because there wasn't enough room. So we used to go to my uncle's house, and when we first went to my uncle's house, it took a while. But then there was there was an incident at first where I was allowed to taste alcohol,
Okay.
and he used to like bitter, and that was horrible stuff. But because I was given the permission to drink it, I'd drink it,
Yeah.
and I was like 9 years old at that point. But he used to grow his own cannabis.
Okay.
So with that own grow of his cannabis, obviously he used to have like mountains of the stuff. It was just homegrown stuff, and he introduced me to that. But what I didn't realize were he was slowly manipulating me into doing stuff that I didn't know I was doing. I was under the influence, you know.
Okay.
So the first age that I was introduced to drugs and alcohol was 9 years old. But that went on for about 3 years, where abuse started happening between my uncle and myself. So that's basically where the drugs started from, to be fair.
I don't want to talk about this too much because I don't think that it's an important part of who you are, to be honest. But I do think that if I didn't ask you questions about it, people are going to say, why didn't I ask you?
Yeah.
Did you find that after the abuse started at such a young age, the gift of, or the giving of, not gift, but the giving of the alcohol and the drugs actually helped numb what was going on for you? So it became sort of a way to cope with what was happening.
Yeah, because every time that it would happen, I was always under the influence of something. I mean, I was that age, and back then, cannabis used to give people the giggles and stuff. So you'd be laughing away, and you'd be eating food and stuff.
Munchies.
Yeah, munchies and that. So I was never not under the influence of anything when I was there, when these things was happening. So it was always cannabis. It was always cannabis. And nothing would ever happen if I wasn't. So he was feeding me the stuff really for it to happen. So yeah, it was numbing. And then obviously it came out, and then but at that point he started losing the plot a little bit. To be fair, like there was different odd little things that was going on, and I was kind of I didn't click onto everything that was happening, and he'd say the words that and I did say a couple of times, and I can remember saying it like that it was wrong, and I used to say the words like this is gay, this is not what, like, I was a child, I didn't understand sexualities and stuff, and this is gay, we shouldn't be doing this, like you're my uncle, and it was like making it out that like it's more of on like a friendly term kind of thing, like we're family, we love each other and all that kind of conversation. So obviously, the older you get, you look back at that stuff and you think, Jesus, like he literally did manipulate my whole brain. So
groomed you.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, really, really. But it wasn't just me that he was doing it to. So he was doing it to the neighbour's child as well. And obviously, I didn't know this, but the neighbour's child was coming round quite often, and I didn't really like the kid anyway. And I thought it was strange that he just kept coming round all the time. But he come round one day when something was just about to happen and actually saved something from happening. It was actually a godsend that day he come round, because it started to get to the point now that I didn't really want to be there anymore, because this stuff was happening every single time. So, but I had no choice to go there. And there was occasions that, I did have an opportunity to go to my grandparents' house, but my brother and sister would end up having to go to his house, and it was like, this could happen to them. So I'd put myself in that situation just to keep it from them, it happening to them, and just keep it just happen to me. It was just a norm for me at that point. So yeah, it was crazy.
It's tragic because you were a kid, and you were having to think about the protecting of your younger siblings at such a young age. That's a heavy burden to bear for anybody, even as an adult. How did it come out? Like, how did you tell somebody? Was he caught? What happened?
How it came out. So basically the story behind it was, so the next door neighbour was a little bit older now. So he was like, 14, 15 years old. And he wasn't that, his sexuality, he was straight. And he had a girlfriend. So where he had this girlfriend, he was then turned into be manipulating my uncle. So he was bringing girls round to my uncle's house. And there was an occasion, and this is what I've been told. So there was an occasion that he'd brought this girl round to my uncle's house, and he got the girl to share a bed with my uncle, not with the fact of my uncle being involved with anything. He'd done it to like wind my uncle up, and he was trying to do things with this girl himself, with my uncle in the same room, which my uncle obviously got attached to the next door neighbour's child. So that made my uncle, he switched a little bit, and he was taking a lot of drugs, and he was drinking a lot of alcohol. So that when that happened that night, he decided to go and hand himself in at the police station. He was under the influence. Yeah, he wasn't sober or anything like that. So he's walked himself into the police station and he's admitted what's been going on for the last few years with the next door neighbour's child. So he got arrested, obviously. So the next day that happened, I've got back from school, and my mum used to work for Royal Mail. So she's asked me if she used to do nights. So she said, would you come and walk me to the bus stop? I need to have a chat. I said, yeah, all right, cool. So I've walked her to the bus stop and she comes straight out with it. And she was like, has your uncle ever done anything to you? And I'm thinking, what? Like, where did that come from? So instantly I'm like, no, of course, he hasn't done anything. Because I was a child that used to lie quite a lot. The boy that cries wolf, anything. You tell me my laces are black and I'll tell you that they're white, like just constant lies all the time. So how we used to put it across is like, no one will believe you anyway. So why would I admit that? Because people are still going to think I'm lying. So I denied it. It wasn't until like the next day I was thinking about it a lot more. And I thought, no, I'm actually going to tell the truth because obviously he's been arrested now for something else. There's no harm that can come to me from this, so I've got nothing to be scared of. So I walked her to the bus stop the next day and I told her the truth. Then as soon as I told her the truth, it all kicked off from there. So, the police station come about and sit in front of cameras. And back then, having people sat with you, you'd usually expect, if something had happened between a boy and a male or a male and a male, they'd have women officers that would sit there and talk to you because it would make you feel more comfortable. And it wasn't like that. I had 4 police officers in there instead, like male. So it was really awkward for me. So as a child, I look back and I think, did I ruin the case myself because I was sat there awkwardly laughing? And when they'd asked me the questions about the deep stuff, like I didn't really want to go into depth about, but I had no choice because it was a case. And I'd had a little giggle because I was feeling really awkward.
Well, you do when I'm like that. If I feel really nervous or embarrassed about saying, but it's the most awkward time to laugh. So you were in that situation,
and I laughed at the wrong time. To be fair, So I did that, and then obviously the stuff had gone to court, and my case got dropped. Okay. So they didn't go forward with my case, but then he got 4 years for the next door neighbour, as well as they found I think it was like 30 black bags of cannabis in his loft that he'd homegrown. Okay. And back then, obviously, that wasn't really that bad, to be fair, with homegrown stuff. So he basically got 4 years in jail for that. So that was kind of like an end of an era for that whole scenario. And from then, it was just, there was nothing really further that went on from that. My behaviour just got a little bit worse. So the whole abuse thing had not been spoken about then. It just got kind of forgotten. So I've just been left with that whole feeling of what happened and nothing happened from following on.
So that was going to be my question. So this has all come out. How old were you?
I was 13 when it came out.
So you're really young still.
Yeah.
But a really pivotal point in your life because 13 is such an important stage where you need parents' support because you're feeling insecure, your body's changing.
Yep.
So did you feel like you had support or was it just not there at all?
No, because I've always spoken about it like that. My brother and sister, and it was the children of my stepfather.
Yes.
And I'm not going to say that I was an angel of a child because I wasn't. Like I'd be lying to say that like everything or the way that I was treated wasn't my fault, and I blame my stepdad or my mum. I'd just be like, that's just immature to say that. Yeah. But there were certain elements of my childhood that could have been better. That just little things. I'd take the rap for certain things that I hadn't even done anything wrong, and even if I'd done it, I was in a catch-22 situation. Even if I'd done right or wrong, I'd still be punished for stuff, and I'd be punished quite. I'd be literally manhandled by a grown man, and it's in the end, the pain of the stuff that I'd be getting from being hit and stuff, it just didn't hurt anymore. I'd hit so many times, it just don't.
Become immune to it.
Yeah, it was just the norm now. But there was an occasion, so when it come to school, I was being bullied at school, and I was really quiet. And obviously, now when I look back, I knew why. Like I was really isolated with stuff that had gone on for me. It just literally just made me sink within myself, and I was being bullied by this certain kid. And when it had all came out, it felt like a weight lifted off of my shoulders. So, and I'd always been told as a child, stick up for yourself and always go for the bigger one. And the rest of them will leave you alone. Sometimes that don't work out, but
it's a good theory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he was just terrorizing me at school, and it was really embarrassing me in front of my friends. So it had come out, and I'd had enough. So that one day, I literally exploded. I did a number on him, and the teachers all had to like get me off of him, and I lost friends because of it. Strangely, because it wasn't my character. I wasn't like that. I wasn't a violent child. I was never really rude, or I never was aggressive to anybody. I've never bullied anybody and stuff. And I actually lost friends because they like looked at me differently because I'd done that just by sticking up for myself. So I got excluded from school for that fight, and then when I got back, I got a good hiding for sticking up for myself.
Oh,
Which
so
again,
after they've told you to stick up for yourself.
yeah. So I'm like, it's just like a yo-yo. I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
What's going on? You've just told me to do that. So yeah. So that was leading up to that age, 13.
So what was the crowd of people like that you started hanging around with in your teens? Like, who were you associating yourself with?
I've always been drawn to older people. Always been drawn to older people. When that had happened, when like, at 13 years, I started going into a youth club. And in this youth club, they had a joint on boxing club as
Okay.
well. People that obviously might watch this, it was called Ball Youth Club. So everyone used to congregate there. And I started interacting with boxing. So I tried to get myself involved in something. Like I say, I wasn't a violent person. I was scared to hit somebody. And if I was to get in a fight, I'd rather kick you in the shin and run away than rather have a full on scrap with you. It just weren't me. So I didn't know how I'd get on with the boxing, but I got on all right with it. It was something that matched me, and I was doing really well. But it was a youth club, and there was a lot of older people that was in there, and I was more drawn to the older people in the youth clubs than I were the boxing. Even though I was still boxing, I was still drawn to it. And I didn't have a lot of money as a kid. Families was just working no end of hours just to pay the bills. Christmas times was the times we'd get treated throughout the year. We'd get nothing. And these kids were sitting there with your expensive crisps, your expensive drinks that I can't afford to have. And I wanted to be like that. Like, why can't I have that kind of drink? Why can't I have them packets of salt and vinegar Walkers? Like, that's what I want to have. So I started to slowly drift within them. And that kind of slowly took me onto the streets, really. And I found that I was getting more attention from the older generation than I was getting from at home. So, if that's what you're getting, if you're not getting the attention indoors, you're going to find it outside. You're just going to stick with the outside. And that's how it escalated.
So that was your introduction into gang life?
Yeah.
Yeah. You did have some therapy, didn't you?
I had behaviour therapy.
Yeah.
I had a stutter.
Okay.
And that's probably caused by most of the stress that I was having. So I went to behavioural therapy, and I hated the woman in there. Like, she was just so not empathetic at all.
Yeah.
She was just very, how can I put it? Straight to the point all the time. Just, there was just no, obviously, when it comes to therapy and stuff, they're not really supposed to show sympathy anyway, because then the sympathy actually turns the session into them and not about me. Empathetic way of like understanding and stuff. I'd never got that with her. So we had like a hate relationship. When I'd go in there, I'd be an absolute, I just wouldn't be very nice in there. So as therapy would go, it wouldn't go anywhere. So I weren't getting any help with my behaviour. I wasn't getting any help with any of my issues that I'd gone through and stuff, because I wasn't allowing it to, because I didn't like her. But it was really difficult to get back then. In the 90s, there wasn't much about, compared to like today. Nowadays, you can make a phone call, you can get a referral, you didn't have that then. So that was kind of like my only opportunity really as a child to try and get some sort of therapy. So my therapy turned into crime.
You started criminal activities, and that was your outlet for how you were feeling inside.
Yeah.
How were you feeling inside? Like, what were the emotions that you were feeling that you felt you needed to do these things to get that out of you?
I was angry at everybody. So I didn't really care about anyone, to be fair. I was menace to society. I think most of us were. We was all, you have that antisocial behaviour and stuff, and we was literally causing chaos in the community. So we'd just do anything that would cause trouble, and we'd think it was fun. It could be something as just simple as like putting someone's windows through. Okay. We'd think that was hilarious. Like not even thinking about the damage you're causing putting someone's windows through, or they could have children in their house or anything like that. We didn't think of that. We was children ourselves. So it just started from just petty stuff at first, breaking into cars and joyriding and stuff around the estates and that.
Can I ask you something? Was it when you think back at those times, you had a lot of anger. You were with these other kids that had a lot of anger,
Mm.
and you were doing these things that were really silly. You weren't thinking about the consequences because you were a kid, and you couldn't. You kids don't think about consequences of things like that. But was it that little adrenaline rush that you got from doing those things that encouraged you and made you feel good about yourself after you'd done it, that made you keep doing it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was fun. So, you know, some kids at that age would find it fun climbing a tree.
Yeah,
Some people would find it fun making a rope tree and swinging and going into a lake.
yeah.
That weren't fun for me. I thought that was boring. But that stuff was exciting for me. I enjoyed it. I couldn't wait to go out. And at that point I'd been expelled from school, so I had nothing else to do. I was at home constantly. My parents was at work, so I had the roots to myself. I could do whatever I wanted, and that passed the time for me. And it was fun. We had a good giggle doing it. I mean, we had giggles at other people's expenses. Yeah, of course, I understand that now, but it was, yeah, it passed the time. It was just all the, you know, the congregating, the conversations you'd have between each other, because we didn't cause trouble all the time, but it was just, you know, we could be a crowd of lads, and we'd be standing in an alleyway or standing on the corner of somewhere and just having a bit of a giggle. And but then it get to the point, you know, if people walking past you and stuff, they're really nervous to walk past you. I see that now, but back then, you know, we didn't care. I mean, we probably would have like caused chaos with them walking past us anyway. Like that's just, we was horrible as kids. So yeah, it was exciting. I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it.
I understand the psychology behind that.
Yeah.
Because you're getting a rush and you're forgetting about bad and negative feelings you have, because whatever you're doing is giving you an outlet, like you said, to feel a totally different emotion and a different feeling. So that's what you were replacing those negative feelings with the behaviours. So I understand that. I understand why as kids you would have done that. I mean, obviously we as adults know it's completely wrong.
Exactly.
And that you would have maybe more boxing or more things to fulfill your time or more help or more love and attention. But if you don't have that, what are you to do?
And that was I did do the boxing, and I did 3 tournaments that I'd won.
Yeah.
And I did do well at it, but it just still didn't do something for me. Like there was something missing. Yeah, and I would much rather just be on the streets. I spent most of the time on the streets than I did at home. And even I didn't like my family that much. I'd actually cause trouble at my own house. Even with my brother and sister in there, they'd be scared. I'd egg my own house. We'd all just stand there laughing, egging my own house just to wind my stepdad up, because he used to get so angry. And he'd come out and he'd be effing and blinding at the door. And we'd just run off down the alleyway. I even stole my stepdad's car and drove it. Well, not even drove it because I couldn't snap the steering lock, but we got inside the car and there was an alleyway straight facing that car, and we rolled it so it's stuck in the alleyway where we had to climb out of the sunroof to get out of the car, and just left it there. Like that's how much I used to just terrorize my family. But at that point, I didn't care because no attention was being shown to me. Why should I care? Like, you know, there was never anything nice to be said. And this is the issue, like, you know. There could be children that could do so much negative, but they could also do a couple of positives within that. But it's the negatives that outshine the positives, and that's all you concentrate on. And that's how it worked for me. So I just used to do the negative because it used to get that much attention, and I'd be bad, like really, really bad. To be fair, if you watch that, I don't even think I've even admitted that I've even done that, but I have now. It was me.
Is he still alive?
Yeah.
Oh, sugar.
Yeah, he's still alive.
You lived in a hostel. Where was the hostel?
So the hostel was on an infamous road in Nottingham called Forest Road.
I know Forest Road. I used to live in Nottingham.
Did you?
I lived in the park. I was very lucky at that point in my life.
Okay.
But yeah, I lived in Nottingham.
Yeah, so Forest Road, obviously very infamous for prostitution and drug dealing. It was right along Forest Fields where Goose Fair and stuff is. So, you know, there was a lot of activity that used to go on there.
Can I just ask you, how old were you? So is this when you first left home?
So I left home at 15.
Okay.
So when I'd left home at 15, so roll it back.
Yeah.
So at 15, I'd left home. I went to stay. Well, originally, actually, I didn't leave home straight away. My parents had broke up. So where they'd split up, my mum went and stayed at my grandparents, and my stepdad was supposed to stay in the house with me and my brother and sister. Then I've got back and no one was there. So most of the expensive stuff had been taken out the house, but there was no one there, and the 2 dogs were still left in the house. So I thought, well, like, where is everybody? I didn't think about it first of all. For the first night, it was all right. I just thought, yeah, all right, I'll kick back and I'll just watch a bit of TV and that, and that's what I did. And then woke up in the morning, still no one's come back, and I'm thinking, well, where is everyone? So I used to pay phone back then because obviously didn't have mobile phones, and I phoned my grandparents' house to see if my mum was there. She was there, and I told her that, like, you know, where is everyone? So she was like, oh, well, you know, me and your dad's taking a bit of a break. He's going to stay at the house with you and you and your brother and sister, and we'll see if we can work it out. I was like, well, he's not here. She was like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, he's not here. I'm on my own. So it turned out that he took my brother and sister to his mum and dad's.
Okay.
And then I got left in the house on my own with the 2 dogs. So
nobody had a conversation with you. You just walked home one day. There's nobody there. Your mum's not said nothing to you. Stepdad's not, and they've just forgotten about you.
Yeah, gone, yeah. I thought that, right, sweet, party. I'll get one of my pals round.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. So I had all my friends around the house, causing absolute chaos in my house. One of my friends that's quite infamous in Nottingham, he set fire to curtains in my house, and my whole living room went up, and it was just all like a buzzy party, you know? And
can I ask you something? At this point, were you using drugs?
No.
You weren't drinking?
Odd occasion here and there, wasn't my thing really. After the thing had stopped with my uncle, I didn't really go back with that.
Okay.
So it wasn't really for me.
Yeah.
I was just doing it off pure high off my own life, really. Odd occasion, I'd have a bit of a tipple of alcohol here and there, but nothing major.
Okay.
I didn't really have the money, and I weren't really into stealing back then. So on the odd occasion, little chump bar here and there from the shop, but other than that, nothing. But so the next door neighbour had made a complaint, and my uncle used to be one of the management at the council at the time in Bulwell, and he come round with the police and had me removed from the house. So my own uncle had me removed from the house. I'm basically like, well, where am I going to go now? I've got 2 dogs. So luckily my other uncle Martin, he took me in, and he took both dogs as well, and I went and stayed with him for a while. So I had nothing to live on, but my mum was still getting my child support.
Okay.
So I kicked up a fuss about it and ended up getting because it used to be the post office books back then.
Yeah.
So I got the book off my mum and said, that money's mine. I'm not with you no more. I'm staying with Martin, so I need that money to survive. So I got that from her. But within that time, I was still, you know, messing around on the streets and stuff. And obviously being at my uncle's house, he was really laid back, ex-military. He was a drinker himself. He was an alcoholic. And we could do whatever the hell we pleased. And I did start smoking cannabis when I'd gone back there, because I could just do whatever I wanted to do. And I managed to get a placement into a hostel. But, you know, around this time, I was having a couple of fights now. Like, our friends, we was just doing things. We was robbing people in the streets and stuff. So the crime started to get a little bit more escalated. My friend was hanging around with a lad that, like, none of us liked. He was a bit of a dodgy kid. He was, you know, he's getting himself mixed up in things that he shouldn't be doing. But he was seen with my mate. We kept having a word with him, you know, saying, you know, leave him, don't hang around with him, you know, so it's not good. And this lad apparently had robbed a couple of Jamaicans, like little stashes. So they kind of like pulled up one night and they stabbed my pal in the chest. So yeah, that was like.
Did he survive?
No, he died in my arms.
Oh.
So yeah.
So that refers to your best friend's death that I've got notes about.
Yeah, but that both goes in by
together?
The by with the hostel as well, because it was around that time.
Okay.
I moved into, so after that had happened, obviously he passed away, he died in my arms, and obviously that had happened.
What impact did that have on your life?
Well, he was my best friend, so it was hard, but at that time you don't think about it as much. Like, you know, it's hard to explain. In that life, these things happen.
Yeah.
You never expect it to happen to you or any of your friends dying, not in them circumstances anyway. But it was the norm. Like there was a few people that had passed away that we knew. You know, someone got shot in the head. Like there was a few things that had happened, but it was just like, what blah blah got killed. Like, okay. You know, he's died? Did he? What happened to him? He was in a police chase, had a car crash.
But didn't it ever make you think, oh my God, I'm running in these circles?
Nope.
It could be me.
Nah, because you don't think like that until it actually happens, which then it did 6 months later. So I'd had a fight with someone. I was always one that used to take upon this stuff because that's just how I were. I was ruthless. I didn't really care. I had nothing to care about. Like I said before, I hated the world. And I had a fight with a lad. a couple of weeks later, like I said, I'd started smoking weed then, and I needed to go over to a certain part of an estate and use a payphone to phone up someone to get something, and the guy didn't have anything. And then there was a few lads that had come from out of like a dark part of where they were, and they shouted me over, and I spotted that the kid was there, that I'd done what I did to. And then I got jumped by all of them, and I had an opportunity to run, but I didn't run. You know, I just stayed where I were, and I got jumped, and then I got stabbed in the thigh. So I was left then, and I fainted with my hand on the knife. So, you know, obviously I was thinking of pulling it out, I expect. So, but the hospital said if I'd have pulled it out, I wouldn't have made it. I'd have died. So that had happened, which is obviously, that's another significant event. And again, it was used as a badge of honour. I've been stabbed, yeah. Like, I've survived a stabbing. Like, that's just how it were. You're just walking around with a bit of a limp for a while, and people were saying, "Oh, you're all right. We heard you got stabbed," and blah blah blah. So everyone was talking about it, which made you front page news. You know,
local hero.
Yeah, exactly.
To them.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But the wrong hero.
Yeah.
You know, and then I moved into, and at that point, I started selling hard drugs. Well, not me personally selling them, but I was running them for older people. And I didn't know what these drugs were. I've heard the name, but I don't know what it were.
What was it?
Heroin.
Okay.
But you mentioned heroin to me. It's just like heroin. It's just a word.
What is it? Yeah.
I didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
So I was moving that stuff about, just getting a bit of change for it. Like even a tenner back then, it needs a lot of money to you. And I managed to get a placement in a hostel. It was Somerville House, it was called, on Forest Road. And I moved into there. So when I've got in there, I noticed that there was a lot of people that was like, what they call it in the heroin, it was like gouging out. So they was like asleep on the sofas. And I've said to this kid, I was like, why is everyone sleeping? Why don't they go out and do something? And they was like, they're on heroin. I was like, heroin? Like, I sell that stuff. What is that what it does to you? He was like, yeah. And I was like, really? And he was like, have you never tried it? I said, no, I've never tried it before. And I used to smoke cigarettes back then. And he was like, you can smoke it in a cigarette. That's what I did. So I tried it. And it had me straight away, basically, from that start. Into like, because you meet some people, and you can speak to some people, and they either like it or they don't. Like sometimes it can make people feel sick, and the feeling that it makes them have, that puts them off, and they don't want to touch it. But that had the opposite effect for me. I enjoyed that, and from the minute that I tried it, everything that probably would have been going on for me in my life, forgot about.
How old were you?
Nearly 16.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, nearly 16 years old.
That's so young.
Yeah. And I was hooked.
That is, I'm battling my emotions here. I'll be honest with you, because I know this story, but 16 years old, your life hadn't even begun. You were just a young boy, really.
Yeah.
And you were hooked on something that is really, like, literally scientifically the hardest drug to come off of.
And it's also one of the strongest drugs you can ever take. And the effect that had on me, I got hooked pretty quickly. And I was taking it from that moment on, basically every day.
How were you paying for it?
I was selling it. I was using the supply that I had, which as a result of that, I got in debt. Which is, I know you've got another question, like, I don't know how far down that is, but it got me in debt, and I was using the supply that I had. But you know, even still with a few things that I'd saw in the hostel, you know, there was a guy that I met in there called Mark, and I can name him because I don't think he's alive anymore, but he was in the hostel, and he'd overdosed. So where I'd like been in his room at one point already, and I'd spoken with him, he told me what he was going to do. I said, all right, cool, I'll come back in 5-10 minutes. I went back in them 5-10 minutes, and he was up against the wall foaming at the mouth, and he'd OD'd. And that was the first ever time I've ever seen that happen to anyone, and it freaked me out. So I've gone downstairs straight away to tell the staff members that had happened. I saved his life, really, because he could have passed away very quickly. He was in hospital for about 2 weeks, and even that didn't put me off. And I did have a chance, because my key worker that was in the hostel at the time said to me, please tell me that you're not taking heroin. Please tell me you're not taking heroin. And I denied it straight away. I said, no, of course I ain't taking it. I were, and I was pretty hooked at that point. If I'd have been honest, I look back and think, if I'd have been honest and said that, yeah, I am taking it, would I have managed to get the help and support that I needed there and then to not end up how I did end up many years later, because I would have been given that opportunity. But obviously that opportunity went under the bridge, and I continued then on throughout other years. So
Did you only smoke it?
I smoked it for the first 6 months.
And after that, you
And then after that, the
intravenous?
smoking wasn't hitting it anymore. So usually what happens if you're not getting the buzz that you was previously getting, you'll go to a way that you'll get it quicker.
Okay.
And that's how I did.
Okay. Obviously, this path that you were on led you to go to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a natural progression. But I do want to ask you something before we talk about that. Because you're not a drug addict now. You're clean. How many years have you been
7.
clean? Which is really good, and kudos to you for that, because I know, like, not from my own experience, but I know how hard it is to come off drugs, and it's not an easy thing to do. So I think you have to keep reminding yourself every single day how wonderful it is for you and Carla and the kids that you have kept yourself clean for such a long period of time. But what I wanted to ask you was this. If I said to you, I tell children not to smoke weed because it's a gateway drug to other drugs, but they say, it's all right, it's herbal, it's grown in the earth, I'll be okay. What would you say, being someone who started smoking weed and then started taking heroin and is now clean? What would your response be to them?
I think it depends on their circumstances. I mean, looking at like adverse childhood experiences, and if you look at the statistics now, 5 in 10 children go through something adverse in their life. It's sad to say, but that's what they do. It's 5 in 10, which is quite a lot of children. And I've met quite a lot of young people that do smoke weed, and they think the same as what you've just said, that it's good for you, and it come out of the ground, or it's grown, and that people look after it, and it's okay. But the problem, what you're finding, is it's not the way that it's grown, it's what it's mixed with chemically now. And that's what makes the brain go and work as a different imbalance to the way that you think. And it does alter the way that it's a mind-altering substance. These drugs are gateways. They are gateways to other things, because not only will it be cannabis, the next thing probably that it will go up, because when they get to that certain age, they're allowed to go out drinking now. Then cocaine comes into it. So I've seen it many, many times, and there's people that I know that have started off with smoking cannabis, and they have gone to harder drugs, to the class A's, to the cocaine, to the heroin. I always say be careful with your decisions that you make. And also a lot of it comes from peer pressure. So you could have let's say a group of 10 of you, 7 of you are smoking weed, but there's 3 of you that are not. You're going to be the odd ones out. So then the pressure comes from that now you're more inclined to actually start smoking it, because the other 7 are. And there's a lot that comes with it. School, you got to think the way that you're working within your school with your work. You're not going to be on form when it comes to doing your GCSEs and stuff. You could be starting with like paranoia at an early age. It affects you massively, but people just don't understand it because it's so out there. I mean, you could put on the TV, you could watch YouTube, or you could watch movies, and you'll see and notice, even with rap videos, everybody's smoking weed.
Yeah.
So you've got young people looking up to these people that are influencing as celebrities, that are smoking weed, and young people are following suit.
Normalising it.
They're following suit. So you can say in certain circumstances that you're fighting a losing battle with it, because if they can do it and it's allowed to be shown on TV, it can't be that bad for you, can it? But it actually can, because obviously the longer term effects that has on you, you won't understand until you go too far, and then you'll realise it and then be in a position that I was.
So the position that you were in was that you were committing crimes and going to prison. But you weren't just committing crimes and going to prison. You were committing crimes so you could go back to prison. Mm-hmm. What was your thinking? Why were you doing that? Why were you in that circle of events? Why were you doing that?
Because I was always homeless. So I'd be sofa surfing here, there and everywhere. I'd be battling to have a property to get a roof over my head, going to the council constantly, being a young person and stuff, trying to get houses, a nightmare. So when I first initially went to prison, it was easy. I was scared at first, obviously on the bus on the way there, I was really nervous. I didn't know what to expect going there. But the minute that I landed in there, it wasn't bad as I thought it was going to be. And I try not to say this to young people because I don't want them thinking, oh, well, actually, prison's not that bad.
Yeah.
Don't get it twisted. This was back in the early 2000s. Prison's changed now.
Yeah.
But back then, it was okay. I had a lot of fun. I made friends with people. There was actually quite a few people that I knew that was in there. And when it was time for me to get shipped out of a certain prison to another one, I didn't even want to leave. I was like, no, don't. I want to stay here because I'm like with him. I don't want to go anywhere else. I'm comfortable. But, you know, when you're allocated to other prisons, you have to go. So my first prison sentence was obviously, it was Glenparva in Leicester. And then from Glenparva, I went to Doncaster, it used to be called Hatfield Open Prison, but they changed the name to Moorlands because they were switching between the two. And where I'd gone from a closed prison to an open prison, oh my God, like I thought it had all come at once for me, Christmas. It was there. Now you've got free roam to do anything. You've got a key to your door. You go out for your food and everybody's congregated in the same hall and you're all eating together, HMP and YOI together, men and kids, all eating together. The food was massive. Like you've got whole plates of food. You can go out for seconds if you want. And I was thinking, Jesus Christ, 7 days a week gym. So it was just like being outside, but you're not outside. There's just the only inconvenience to it was you just don't get to see other people outside on the street. You know, your old friends and stuff, but you've just made new ones, so it don't matter. So that was it for me. I really enjoyed it, and I was safe. I had 3 meals a day. I had a roof over my head. I had money for canteen because I had a job. I was able to pay for my own stuff in there, and I was comfortable. So that was probably the reason why I kept getting myself put back in or not even be bothered if I were in. It didn't make any difference to my life, to be fair.
I actually think that goes a lot to say what the government of this country does and doesn't do for, or did at that time. I can't say now, but at that time, because we were both homeless at the same time. And as a female, I got a really nice hostel very quickly, which I had my own key, up my own staircase, into my own flat that I was sharing with another girl. We had our own living room, our own bedrooms, our own bathrooms, our own kitchen. I had my own flat at 15, 16 years old. And I know that those kind of places don't exist for men.
No.
And also, not only that, I could get housed very quickly with the council if I needed to. Whereas a man, how old are you? Do you mind me asking?
I'm 41 now.
So you're just a few years behind me. So we're kind of we were at the same kind of places at similar times.
Yeah.
And you didn't have the ease that I had because I had something called women privilege.
Yep.
That you never would, even to this day with the council now, a woman can get a place to live where a man can't. A man is expected to move in with multiple other men and share a room if that's what needs to be done, and that's a man housed. But a woman, if she's by herself, even with no kids, it's a lot easier for her to get housed. And that to me is a really big problem because that is why men turn, like you, young men, turn to doing criminal activities because it's so much harder for them. So you were one of those people, you were one of those statistics. And had you have been female, your life story may have been very different.
We're classed as males as non-priority.
Yeah.
And they use the terminology of mental health.
Yeah.
I went through this actually, didn't I? We went through this when I fell off the rails 7 years ago, when it all went pear-shaped. I relapsed because I was clean for a while before that.
Let's get back. Let's get to the point where your life changed and you said to yourself, right, I'm not going in prison anymore. I'm not going to take drugs anymore. What happened in your life that made you want to stop? What was the catalyst for that?
I was going through a bad time at the time and I was taking a lot of medication as well. And I had something wrong with my liver. And where I'd stopped taking drugs, because I hadn't taken or wasn't taking the drug that I was officially addicted to, I thought it was okay to take other stuff. So I was still doing things that was mentally changing the way that I behaved. So I was taking a lot of, I don't really want to name the names because obviously we do channels and stuff, but I was just taking a lot of prescription pills. And I was doing it, I was taking them like Smarties. I was getting regular orders to my house every couple of weeks. I was just swallowing them like Smarties. And it escalated really, really bad. And at that point, I was dabbling again with that because the dealing didn't really stop, and I was, I was involved. I could never seem to get away from it. My life always seems to drag back to that lifestyle. And if I'm struggling for money, easy ways to make money is to go back to doing what I know best.
It's what you know, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
If you were a carpenter, you'd go back to carpentry.
Yeah, of course.
But you're not.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I did, and I did that, and I weren't in the right frame of mind, so I ended up using. At first, it was secretively. She didn't know, and
Is this when you relapsed?
yeah.
Yeah.
So she didn't know, and then obviously, you start slipping. Your behaviour changes. You start slipping. You leave things lying around. You can't remember you've left it there, and she was catching me out with a lot of stuff. So that was causing some major issues in the house. I started some treatment for my liver, and it made me literally lose the plot. Like, it was not good stuff. And
Why? What was the problem with your liver?
I have hepatitis C.
Was it because of drugs?
Yeah, I think so. To be fair, I don't know how I got it because I've had prison tattoos and stuff, and I've done steroids in my time and that, and and obviously intravenous as well, use. So it could have happened anywhere. I don't know, but when this had happened and I'd gone to the doctors, like, my liver was literally in a mess, and that there was an opportunity for some treatment for it. I lied to the consultant saying that I'd been taking antidepressants to make sure my mental health was okay. I needed to get the treatment done as ASAP, as quick as possible. I was losing a lot of weight. I was being sick constantly every day, and I was taking a lot of prescription pills. So they got me on it, and within a week, I was on that. I literally lost the plot, and I was kicking off in my house. I was doing things in front of my kids. I was flipping dinner tables. I was assaulting Carla. Like, I was doing things out of character. Obviously, with these things going on, there's going to be, a police involvement, and we originally we did ask for support from social services in the October before it finally exploded, and we was left hanging in the winds with that, and they sent us a letter and closed our file because they didn't have enough staff to take it on. And then it slowed down a little bit with the behaviour. Obviously, she knew more about it, and I was back and forth, like a yo-yo with it. And then in April, I come into a bit of money, didn't I? I come into a bit of money, like insurance. As soon as that money had hit, it was quite a few grand. And as soon as that money hit, that was like my head straight away triggered. Money, loads of money. Now I'd already fed myself with the flavour of what I'd originally been doing back in the day. So I've already twigged my brain. And then I had another kick off in my house, and I assaulted Carla in the house. It was in front of my kids, so the emotional harm that my kids would have seen, as well as what I'd done with Carla, that was like the final blowing point of what was going on in the house, and I was removed from the house. Fairly, I can't argue against that because it was the right thing to do. I was out of control, and then we had issues with social services getting involved with us as a family, and I went downhill for a good few months. I lived in a crack house for a few months, which, why the hell would I want to live in there with a life that I've just had? And now look at this, really. So it did take a few months before the light bulb moment clicked, and there was an occasion, like, Carla had come to find me, and she found me. I looked a mess, which I did, even though I could look at myself in the mirror and not think I look that bad, but other people looking at you just look a mess. And she, she said, "What are you doing?" And I was just like, "I don't want to do this no more." And then I stopped the day after. I said, "Take me back, let me come in. And I need to get out of the position that I was in for me to be able to stop." So she gave me that chance. And I stopped.
You're very lucky.
Very lucky, yeah.
Because most women wouldn't have done that.
No, not at all.
So
she's always been really supportive throughout the whole period as well.
That's a really big thing. You're a very lucky man.
Yeah.
Very lucky man. And I think it says a lot about Carla that she was so forgiving of things, but also so understanding that this isn't your normal character, and that you're being controlled by something that you can't ultimately feel like you can't control at that point. Yeah,
I didn't know what I was doing half the time. Like, I still listen to some of the stories now, and I just don't remember.
Yeah, it's like someone else did it. Like, what, me?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that how it is?
Yeah, it's hard, and I've pushed it away.
Yeah, well, you would,
Loads.
wouldn't you? And your brain also, when you go through traumas, a natural reaction for your brain is to black memories out.
Yeah.
So it's a coping mechanism, isn't it? So your brain's telling you, no, these things didn't happen. Let me forget about them, and I'll move on and be a good person that I am now.
Because the story behind the drugs,
If you could say to the youth of today one thing about who they surround themselves with, what would you say?
different businesses or companies to donate money to get these bleed boxes up. The council or the government should do them anyway. They're saving people's lives.
Get out of either gangs and drugs and do something really positive for other people.
Behind the project team is me and Carla.
So it's just the two of you.
Yeah, two's a duo.